During an experiment, researchers set out two ordinary individuals for a simple self-questionnaire test. But the hidden goal was to make them feel like they had failed, a task rigged to be unwinnable, feedback designed to sting, without telling them the ultimate reason for it. So they separated the two individuals into separate rooms. One would recover in minutes. The other would stay shaken for the rest of the day. Only one of them got their confidence back. By the end of this video, you'll understand exactly what separated them. You already know the feeling. It's the version of you that shows up after the exam you studied for and still failed. After the audition that went nowhere, the pitch that got quietly passed over, the promotion that went to someone else, after the breakup text that never gets a real explanation, or the layoff email that lands at 9 in the morning on a random Tuesday like it's nothing. Your chest tightens. Your thoughts start running the same loop on repeat. And somewhere underneath all of it sits a quiet, sinking question. Do I still trust myself? Here's what almost nobody tells you about that moment. The difference between the person who stays stuck for years and the person who rebuilds in weeks has almost nothing to do with strength or willpower or how big the failure actually was. It comes down to one specific measurable reaction happening in the space of seconds that most people are doing completely backwards without ever realizing it. To understand what that reaction is, you first need to understand a term most people have never heard, even though nearly everyone has lived through it. Psychologists call it ambiguous loss. It was first used to describe grief with no funeral attached to it, a missing person whose fate is never confirmed, a parent slowly disappearing into dementia while their body still sits across the table from you. No ending, no ritual. Just an open question the mind is never given permission to close. And here's the unsettling part. Researchers have found this exact mechanism quietly run subconsciously in relationship breakups and job losses, in people who've lived their lives normally, without even being able to realize. Picture the relationship that was never officially anything, so when it ended, there was nothing official to grieve. The situationship that faded through slower replies and half-finished conversations instead of an actual ending. Picture the job that didn't end with a firing, but with a slow fog, a role folded into someone else's, a restructuring with no real explanation, a departure with no single moment you can point to and say, that's when it happened. A 2026 analysis of this pattern found something that flips the assumption almost everyone carries into these situations. The chronic limbo of not knowing where you stand is often measurably more psychologically stressful than a clean, definitive loss, not less. More. Which means you were never weak for still thinking about the breakup that wasn't even that serious. You were never broken for still feeling shaken by the job that wasn't even that big a deal. Your nervous system was never reacting to how important the loss looked from the outside. It was reacting to how unfinished the story still felt on the inside. And unfinished stories are the one thing the human brain is worst at letting go of. So what does almost everyone do next? They reach for the same instinct. Go back. Look at the old photos. Remember the good parts until the ache finally fades. That instinct is where this gets worse before it gets better. Neuroscience research on breakups has found something specific about what happens the instant you pull up old photos of an ex. It isn't neutral remembering. It activates the same reward circuit reactivation researchers see during addiction relapse. The identical pattern lighting up when someone in recovery encounters the exact thing they used to crave. Which means just look back for closure was never actually closure. Mechanically, it's closer to feeding a craving than processing a loss. A small hit of anticipation, followed by a crash, on repeat, every single time you go looking for peace in the exact place that keeps handing you pain instead. That's the first thing almost every recovery attempt gets backwards. Here's the second, and it's bigger. Once the breakup fog lifts, or once the shock of a layoff wears off, almost every piece of advice you'll hear points to the same next move. Rebuild your self-esteem. Believe in yourself again. Prove to yourself you're still capable. It sounds right. It might be the wrong place to start entirely. A 2025 study using computational modeling examined exactly what buffers people's confidence in the moment right after failure, not months later, not once life has already improved, but inside the collapse itself. Self-esteem wasn't the answer. Self-compassion was. And the effect was strongest specifically in low performers, meaning the people struggling hardest were the ones it helped the most, exactly when they needed it most. Here's why that detail matters more than it sounds like it should. Self-esteem is, by definition, contingent. It rises when you succeed and collapses when you don't, which means the very thing you've been told to rebuild your confidence on is built to crack again the next time something goes wrong. You're not laying a new foundation. You're standing on the same trapdoor, calling it recovery, and waiting for it to open beneath you again. Which raises the obvious objection. Doesn't being gentle with yourself just make you soft? Doesn't going easy on yourself after failing just invite more failure? A 2026 study asked precisely that question and found the opposite of what almost everyone assumes. Self-compassion was strongly linked to assertiveness, not weakness, not vulnerability. People who treated themselves with more kindness after a setback were more likely to flourish and grow, not to shrink. That single finding quietly demolishes one of the most widespread misunderstandings in the entire confidence conversation, the belief that kindness toward yourself and acting tough in your life are somehow opposites. They're not opposites. They're the same mechanism, wearing two different faces. And there's a specific experiment that makes this almost impossible to argue with. Researchers ran a controlled study where participants sat through a mock job interview, then were handed a deliberately harsh evaluation afterward, engineered rejection on purpose, timed and measured in a lab. But right before that evaluation landed, a portion of the participants were quietly given something small, a brief self-compassion prompt. A few seconds, nothing dramatic. The people who received it recovered their mood significantly faster than the people who didn't. Same rejection, same sting, same harsh words, but a completely different recovery curve on the other side of it, and the only variable that changed was whether someone had been given permission, seconds before the failure landed, to be kind to themselves through it. Remember the two people from the very beginning of this video? The ones who failed in the exact same way, where only one of them ever got their confidence back? That's exactly who they were. Not two different personalities, not two different levels of natural resilience. Two people who received the identical blow, and one of them had, just seconds earlier, been handed a completely different relationship with themselves to meet it with. But this story doesn't end with the person who lost the job. Here's something almost nobody talks about because it doesn't fit the narrative we're used to hearing. You'd assume the confidence damage stops with the people who actually got let go. It doesn't. There's a documented pattern called workplace survivor syndrome. The guilt, the hypervigilance, the quiet erosion of self-trust experienced specifically by the employees who keep their jobs after a round of layoffs. Recent data shows a majority of them report their mental health getting worse afterward, not relief. Worse. Watching colleagues clear out their desks while silently wondering if you're simply next does something to a person's stability that has nothing to do with whether their own paycheck kept arriving on time. Confidence, it turns out, isn't only damaged by loss. It's damaged by proximity to loss. And for the people the layoff actually did happen to, there's now a specific name for what follows. And it isn't unemployment. In 2026, it was named Professional Identity Purgatory, not the job search itself, not even the financial pressure, the specific disorienting fog of no longer knowing who you are without the role that used to answer that question automatically every single morning. without you ever having to think about it. No clear ending, no clear next chapter yet. Just an in-between stretching out with no visible edge to it. Notice what that actually is. It's the situationship again, the one that faded through half-read messages instead of ending, wearing a different outfit, showing up in someone's career instead of their relationship, running on the exact same wiring underneath. Ambiguous loss once more in a different room, which means the framework for surviving one of these situations is, unexpectedly, the framework for surviving almost all of them. Name the shape of the loss instead of arguing with how big it should feel. If it faded instead of ending cleanly, a relationship, a friendship, a job, you are not overreacting by still feeling shaken. You're having a completely ordinary reaction to an ending your brain was never built to close on its own. Stop returning to the source of the craving, not because the memory doesn't deserve to exist somewhere, because revisiting the photos, the old messages, the saved conversation is not helping you reprocess. It's relapsing. If you actually want the pull to fade, the input has to stop before the feeling can. Stop chasing self-esteem as the finish line and start treating self-compassion as the actual mechanism. Not because it sounds nicer written on a wall, because the evidence points to it being what holds people together in the exact moment failure lands. Let go of the idea that being kind to yourself will make you soft. Self-compassion comes with more decisive action, not less, which means the version of you that's gentler with yourself right now is, quietly, also the more capable one. And give the fog a name whenever it shows up. A breakup with no closure, a friendship that just stopped, a career that faded instead of ending. The disorientation you're feeling right now has already been named, survived, and overcome with self-compassion and love by people whose stories looked exactly like yours does today. Here's the larger truth hiding underneath everything you just heard. Confidence was never actually the thing that got broken by your failure, your breakup, or your job loss. What broke was your belief that you had to earn the right to feel steady and loved again. That love was a prize handed out only after enough proof, enough achievement, enough winning to offset the losing. That was never how it worked. Not for the low performers in that 2025 study who recovered fastest with the least proof behind them. Not for the participants in that mock interview who walked into the exact same rejection and came out the other side, changed only by a few seconds of kindness, offered before the blow landed, not after. You don't need to erase what happened to move past it. You don't need the story to end cleanly to be allowed to close it anyway. You just need to stop treating your own collapse as evidence against you and start treating it as the exact moment self-compassion was built for. That's not the soft version of confidence. It might be the only version that was ever real. Always remember, more kindness and self-love equals more confidence. So raise up and rebuild your confidence by treating the person with love who matter most, yourself.